what's the latest analysis of the lights in the sky over New Jersey and whatever a score of other US locations besides? How are you reading that, and how is everybody else reading that?
Well, nobody can figure out exactly what is going on, but Donald Trump, who was president for 4 years and has a pretty good idea how things work, and he said that the government definitely knows what's going on. The military knows exactly where those drones are coming from and where they're going. And so there's senators, people at the top of government saying that they're being lied to by the government, by the military. So I don't know exactly what's going on. It's nefarious. We'll see. Some people say they're looking for loose nukes. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's something else.
Do you think they've moved? Do you think whoever's pushing that narrative has actually moved into a different kind of game, where they've just put some balls in the air, as it were, and they're waiting to see how people start to react to that, because they've maybe got 3 or 4 different answers that they could come forward with. Are they trying? Is it like a wet finger in the air to see which way the wind is blowing? And if they think they can see what people want to be told, or what will cause the most effective anxiety that will tee up the next thing, is it another level of the game? Let's just put this up and see the way it starts to develop.
I would not doubt it. I've often said that if you can think it, the CIA already has a plan for it. I remember when I was on Joe Rogan one time a few years ago, he had interviewed a Navy pilot who confirmed that he had seen UFOs, right? And they had video of it. And then the Navy came out and the U.S. military, and they authenticated it. Yes, this is a UFO. And I think they call them UAPs now or something. They have a different name for it. And he said, it's real. I'm like, yes, I know it's real, Joe, but why they've been seeing these things for over 100 years. Ever since they invented planes, they've been seeing these things, and the military and the government is always discredited as crazy, and there's conspiracy theories and what have you. And why now do you think? Why now do you think that they're now decided to validate it? And it's because they wanted to build a space force. And that's because they wanted to put money into another military project. I mean, it's beyond disgusting, the money that the United States spends on military. And they got NATO to spend every nation in NATO to spend a certain percentage of their budget on weapons too. And that's the last thing we make in the United States is weapons. So again, as Julian Assange said, this is just about an upward transfer of wealth from the taxpayer to the international security state. So I'm sure this has something to do with that, but it certainly is a nefarious plan on how to maybe frighten people, keep us our eye off the ball of what they're actually doing, things like that. So there's something going on that they don't want us to see. It's another sleight of hand. Look over here, don't look over there.
Am I right that Marco Rubio has already spoken in the past about the need for space war? The necessity for the United States to be ready to have war in space. So you're right that is seeding the ground for the next level of output for the military-industrial complex.
So President Eisenhower, who was a 4-star general, on his way out of office, gave a famous speech, and in the speech he said that we must resist the undue influence of the military-industrial complex. Now, he said that over 60 years ago, right? And so he wasn't joking. And so now our entire country is run by a handful of corporations, and most of them sell bombs and weapons, and they have a stranglehold on our government, and along with Wall Street, but the Wall Street and the military-industrial complex are the same. I call them Western economic hitmen. That's what they are, and that's what we've been doing for over 100 years and longer. And that's how we create these desperate immigrants that are now flooding the Western world. We go and we wreck their country, create a couple of million immigrants each time we do it. and then we flood it, and then we create chaos, and it prevents the working class people from joining together to oppose the establishment. And they pulled it off like a charm in the United States. That, I've been saying ever since Trump got elected, they want you to fear your neighbor. They want you to think there's a white supremacist and a Nazi around every corner and in your neighborhood. And I'm like, no, that's my neighbor. And in fact, they want me to hate them. And they want you to fear them. And I was like, no, what they actually fear is us realizing we have more in common that divides us, and we share a common interest, and we have a common enemy. And that enemy is an oligarchy. The United States, it's the biggest joke that the Democrats kept saying, well, democracy's on the ballot. We don't live in a democracy, and that's not hyperbole. That was proven by a Princeton study over 10 years ago, that we live in an oligarchy. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it doesn't matter who you vote for or what the average citizen or worker wants. Even if the majority of workers want it, it doesn't get enacted into legislation. That legislation correlates exactly to the upper 10% richest people in the country. Whatever their will is, it gets reflected in legislation. And the bottom 80% that have no influence, no effect, and it doesn't show up in legislation. So we live in an oligarchy, and that's why in the United States we have the biggest income inequality. I used to say since the Gilded Age, but you got to go back to the time of the pharaohs now. That's how big our income inequality is. It's just getting worse. They still deny, the Democrat establishment, Republican establishment, they pretend that they need that theater to keep people distracted and hating and fighting, when they all agree on the worst possible things. They agree to keep us from health care. They agree to keep flooding the country with immigrants, to lower the wages and have poor people fighting against even more poor, desperate people. They agree on all the most horrible thing. It's like if your parents were divorced, but they both agreed you should go to military school. That's what it's like living in the United States with our political system.
I wonder what, we've touched on the fact that, since the 90s and America and the CIA has been prosecuting this long-term project to knock over 7 countries to remake the Middle East. That in that period there have been presidents who've been Democrat, presidents who've been Republican. It hasn't made any difference. That policy has been being pursued relentlessly. And with that in mind, what I am as optimistic as the next person that Donald Trump will come in and seek to do something about it. But how realistic is it to hope that he can, when, regardless of who has been in the White House since the 90s, at least the same policy has been enacted? With the best will in the world, can anyone change the direction of the ship of state?
I have my fingers crossed, but I have hope, but I don't have much faith. And, I remember when Barack Obama was elected, everybody was filled with enthusiasm, hope, and optimism for the future. And of course, he was not a departure from George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. He was an extension. He took us from 2 wars to 7. He dropped more bombs than George W. Bush, and they gave him a Nobel Peace Prize. So, the Nobel Prize is completely corrupted garbage. And so right now they had 100 Nobel laureates sign a letter opposing Bobby Kennedy. Why? Because he wants to have safety testing of drugs and vaccines, and he wants to get the poison out of our food supply in the United States, most of the poison which isn't allowed in other countries. So that's the establishment hit job. That's 100 Nobel. This goes to show you that you can buy off a scientist and a Nobel laureate just as easy as you could buy a politician and a used car salesman. And so is there going to be a chance? I mean, it's hard to believe that we have to rely on billionaires to be our saviors, right? And as I like to say in my stand-up act, you know how you become a billionaire? By helping people. Of course, you become a billionaire by crushing people. And, Elon Musk is very anti-union, anti-worker in a lot of ways. He's in charge of DOGE, right? Which is the Department of Government Efficiency. And I'm like, well, I'll believe it when I see him cut the military budget, which is the most bloated thing in the world. And why? Because he's also a military contractor. So he, benefits from the largesse of the Pentagon. So I'm going to wait and see what they actually do. But one thing is for sure, whenever, if they try to do something good, the establishment will oppose them. Now, Elon Musk is talking about cutting Social Security and Medicare. I mean, the exact opposite things that he should be doing. So the establishment's not going to oppose him on that, because they can take your Social Security money, put it right into the stock market, which is a dream they've had forever. George Carlin talked about it 20 years ago. They're coming for your Social Security, and now they are. So we have to keep an eye on the presidency. The MAGA has to stand up against and keep Donald Trump and his administration honest, if at all possible. And but the way they've opposed Tulsi Gabbard, the way they've opposed RFK, that's if the establishment is stamping their feet and screaming, that's how you know there's something good about that person. Now, go ahead.
I do wonder, I've listened to Casey and Callie Means, who've come to the fore, wanting to be part of, and they're being put forward as part of Make America Healthy Again. She's a physician, who's the scales have fallen from her eyes. She was raised in the belly of the beast, and yet she has seen the fundamental problems relating to nutrition and holism and all of the rest of it. I listened to Jay Bhattacharya. I've been watching him for years. He was part of the Great Barrington Declaration, opposing the nature of the lockdown regulations and restrictions and so on and so on. And then there are people like Mike Huckabee and Waltz and the rest of them. You think, the incoming administration seems to have a multiple personality disorder. You look on at it and think, what kind of if that administration was a person, which is the preeminent personality within it that will actually do most of the talking and most of the action?
Well, there's a lot of memes going around now on social media in the United States that Elon Musk is actually the one in charge, and Donald Trump thinks he is, but he's not. I don't buy that. I think that Donald Trump is in charge. And I hope that the people that he's appointed, people like Marco Rubio, are there to do his bidding, and that they will do. That's Huckabee is an unbelievable. He's a bigger zealot than Shmuley. I mean, the guy I've never seen a bigger Zionist zealot than him. And so I hopefully Donald Trump comes in, and his MO, his whole life is that he likes to make deals, and that he wants to take credit for the deals. So hopefully, that's why he's talked about, I could end that Ukraine war in 24 hours. You just cut the money. Hopefully he means it. I found a recording where he knew the problem of the Israel-Palestine. He thought the problem was going to be the Palestinians. And when he met with the PLO and those people, he realized, no, the problem was Benjamin Netanyahu, that he didn't actually want a deal. Of course he doesn't want a deal. They've always wanted to take over the West Bank, Gaza, and further, which is what Syria is about. It's called the Greater Israel Project. These aren't secrets. Just like the prospect for a new American century and them taking over seven Muslim countries, these aren't secrets. They just aren't advertised on the front page of the New York Times. They're not talked about on CNN, the BBC, but they're not secrets. They're published. All these ideas are real. And so hopefully Donald Trump is going to be the same Donald Trump he's been his whole life, where he enforces deals. And so fingers crossed. Again, I have hope, but I don't have a lot of faith.
I mean, even if the intent is there, you take out the personality that is Donald J. Trump, and whoever's there, even if the intent is 100% cast iron solid, it's whether anyone has the strength to alter something that has so ossified and calcified around a single intention. But I mean, in terms of Elon Musk, I'm as fascinated by Elon Musk as the next person. He's a charismatic, enigmatic figure, and it's fascinating to watch and wonder what he's going to do next. But I've spent years now railing against unelected, unaccountable, rich people having influence over my life. And so I remind myself constantly that Elon Musk is another, unelected, unaccountable billionaire who now is in a position of considerable power. And if you're saying there's memes in the United States saying that he's actually the driving force rather than Trump, even if that idea is there, at the same time as being optimistic, but waiting and seeing, I refuse to jump on anyone's bandwagon and think, that this one oligarchic billionaire is going to deliver all the solutions to all of our problems, because none of them ever have before.
I agree with you on that. That's why I think the MAGA base needs to keep their eye on the ball, stay awake, and put pressure on the Trump administration where it needs. Donald Trump, one criticism of him, which I tend to agree with, is that, he wants to be liked. I don't even know if that's a criticism. And I think that's helpful, maybe in a lot of ways, as a politician. So if he feels like he's losing his base, maybe he'll change his tune. He certainly seemed to change his tune about COVID. The only see that I'm of two minds, right? So the establishment, even though Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, somehow the establishment is opposed to him in a lot of ways, even though he is the establishment in a lot of ways. Same thing with Donald Trump. He was a billionaire, and he was always welcomed in the establishment. They loved him his whole career. And then as soon as Tucker Carlson says the problem with Donald Trump for the establishment is they're afraid he's going to do one less war than Kamala Harris. And I think that's all it takes. And so, I don't think Elon Musk or Donald Trump or Bobby Kennedy or anybody is a panacea. I think that there's good parts in those people, and that we have to have nuance and separate and keep our eye on when they're going to do something bad, like when he wants to come in and cut Social Security and Medicare. Not good. Right. But when they want to end a war in Ukraine, when they want to end a war in Gaza, those are good things. And I'd be for that. When they want to close the border and have a sane immigration policy, those are also good things. That's also something that the establishment, the Western economic hitmen, oppose.
It's Schrodinger's presidency, isn't it? It's in the box at the moment, and it's both alive and dead simultaneously. And until we get to January 21st and the box is opened, there's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing the form that it will take, what it actually is. Yes,
correct. And that's, I've had some of my friends who have been overly critical and cynical about everything. And I have to remind them, my rule of thumb is like they were talking, people just completely crapping on RFK and crapping on Tulsi Gabbard. And I have to remind them, if they're coming at them that hard, that means that there's somehow a threat to the establishment. The same thing with Trump's Hegseth, with his defense secretary nomination. Now, all I know is that an email from his mother to him ended up on the front page of the New York Times. You're telling me that is not that is the establishment doing every dirty trick in the book, that they're somehow afraid of that guy. There's something about him that threatens the establishment. And so that's my rule of thumb. If the establishment is doing dirty tricks like that, then I'm going to give that person a chance and see what they do. Not that, I don't even know that much about Hegseth. But just knowing that the New York Times and the establishment would go to that extent and do that kind of dirty trick, because I've seen the dirty tricks they do about me. I don't have to look anywhere else. I've seen what the establishment lies about me. All you have to do is look at my Wikipedia page, which is edited by the CIA, FBI, and the MI6. That shows you what they're afraid of, right? I've debunked the Syrian gas attacks, which was a complete false flag, and the Wikipedia says that's a conspiracy theory, even though the OPCW whistleblowers have what's funny is that they're not going to call Anderson Cooper a conspiracy theorist for launching that completely fake Syrian prison break story. They're not going to call Rachel Maddow a conspiracy theorist for doing Russiagate, which is the dumbest, most easily debunked conspiracy theory of my life. She did it at the top of her lungs for 7 years straight. She's still doing it. They'll never be called conspiracy theories for saying ivermectin is a horse medicine. So that'll never happen. So again, if you lie at the behest of the establishment, you're golden. But if you tell the truth, they'll call you a conspiracy theorist, and they'll call you a crazy person and try to discredit you. And we have to rely on those people. The people have been discredited. I mean, look what they did to Jay Bhattacharya, right? The top of his field, and they tried to make him sound like he was fringe and some kind of crazy person. There's no more sober guy I've ever met in my life than Jay Bhattacharya. No more measured, sober, and honest. And so if they can do that to him, they can do it to anybody. So, like, again, they do it.
Yeah, I mean, Angus Dalgleish, the oncologist, the cancer doc in the UK, you know, again, at the top of his field, you know, you're treating people in the process of helping people with cancer, you know, and he's been so pilloried. You know, he's out there, you know, quite recently saying that SV40, this element that's in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, that he's been using it for years to make mice grow cancerous tumours so that they could test chemotherapy drugs. And he comes out there and says these things which take my breath away. And the only official response is always to attempt to dismiss him as some kind of a crank. And you mentioned Hegseth. I find him a fascinating choice because prior to his selection for defence, and of course he has this 2018 speech that he gave in Israel saying that there was no reason to not hope for the third temple being built on Temple Mount and so on and so on. But I had previously only known him because of the book that he co-wrote, The Battle for the American Mind, in which he absolutely, with pin sharpness, pinpointed the problems with the corruption of the education system in the United States of America for the last 100 years. And I thought I would have put him in charge of education, because education to me is much more foundational and means much more in the long term than defence and the military industrial complex. But again, as you say, that these people are being hauled into the spotlight and targeted for destruction, which, as you say, you're right to think, why are the crosshairs putting a red dot on that forehead?
That's and that's my rule of thumb. When the establishment targets somebody, and you can see, I mean, come on, they got an email from his mother. How did they get that? I know how they got it from me. When I gave a speech to the Security Council at the United Nations on the anniversary of the NATO, the United States and their CIA blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which they did. I gave a speech to the UN Security Council on the flight home. My iPhone, my Mac computer, and my iCloud account all got taken over. Wow. And they used that thing Pegasus, which was developed by the Mossad, and which means it wasn't an individual. It was a state actor, meaning it was the Mossad or the CIA or the FBI. It was someone like that, because to get a hold of Pegasus cost millions of dollars. So it wasn't a person. In fact, my IT person who discovered it for me is former military intelligence, and his whole job is he gets hired by countries to try to hack into their computers to see where their vulnerabilities is. And when he saw my situation, he said, "Oh my God, Jimmy, even I couldn't do this. This has to be a state actor." And he found out it was Pegasus. And so that's how they do stuff like that. So I know firsthand, if you're doing anything, even me, little Jimmy Dore, with giving one little speech at the UN Security Council and telling the truth on YouTube and Rumble about what's actually happening with the wars, is a threat to them. The only thing that's a threat to the establishment, or the biggest threat, is the truth. And if you're a truth teller, you're in trouble. Look what they do to truth tellers.
Well, at least it's the end of another year. It's Christmas is upon us and we're moving into another year. And I suppose that alone, we have to force ourselves to be optimistic about the turning of a page, going into 2025 and seeing what it actually delivers.
Fingers crossed. Again, I have hope. I don't have much faith, but whew.
Jimmy Dore, as always, it's a pleasure to see you, pleasure to hear your voice. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I've actually taken up more of your time than I intended to, but I was enjoying too much listening to you. I hope we can do this again sometime.
I hope so. Likewise, it's always a pleasure. I keep up the great work. I'm a big fan.
Merry Christmas, Jimmy Dore.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.